Welcome everyone to the third event of the monthly dev. Woo! I can't believe it's already our third event. If you are new here, the monthly dev is a series of monthly online events where we bring together world-class speakers to teach and inspire us all. We talk about topics about web performance, automated testing, the latest and greatest frameworks for web development, and basically everything around web development. We organize these events to create a TED-like platform for us, for developers. I'm Ido from daily.dev, and I'm super stoked to host you all here. So thank you for coming, and we have such a great event waiting for us today. We created this incredible lineup for today. We will start this event with Neil, who will explain all about Microfrontends and how they can help us to iterate faster and innovate in our organization. Neil will be followed by Kent, who is going to show us how we can be confident in our React application, and I will give you a small hint. It has to do with automated testing. Don't tell him that I let you know this. And lastly, Katerina will demonstrate how to build UI library using Storybook and Nx. Make sure to ask your questions in the comments below, and we will do our best to answer them all at the end of each session. For those of you who still don't know daily.dev, it's a platform that gathers all the programming news in one place. Do try it out after the event. We have an extension and a PWA with mobile supports that we just recently launched. So give it a try. And if it's not your first event, you already know that there is no the monthly dev event without a giveaway. So today we are going to give a laptop sleeve. So make sure to share the event on social media, add the monthly dev hashtag to the post, and we will pick the 10 most creative shares. Do it now and get a chance to win our laptop sleeve. And without further ado, let's start this event. Please make some virtual noise and a lot of comments. Please welcome Neil on stage. Hey, Neil.
Hi. Hey, Ido.
How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you very much. It's so great to have you here. I've heard so much about Microfrontends lately, but I've never seen it in action. So I can't wait to see your talk already.
Fantastic. I'm excited to share.
So yeah, go ahead and good luck.
Awesome. Thank you. So as Ido said, my name is Neil Giarratana. I serve as the tech leader for the platform team within Asurion. So in terms of where to find me, at Neil's Mind on Twitter, Neil's Mind on GitHub. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, great. You probably just want to click on Twitter and click the link there rather than trying to figure out my last name. If you're unfamiliar with Asurion, basically we're your tech companion for all of your devices. So we do everything from protect them, providing protection programs, to providing tech support within, et cetera. And you may have heard some of our brands. So in Tel Aviv, I think Saludo's very well known, as well as in the States. And in the States, you've probably heard about You Break, I Fix. Both are brands of Asurion. They're part of us and part of that whole sort of trusted companion piece that we have. And so what I'm hoping to share today is effectively three things you come away with. One, sort of what are micro front ends and how do they sort of work? Two, why would I use them or why wouldn't I use them? And three, sort of how to influence your organization and bring them forward successfully together. So first, talking a little bit sort of how we built apps, 3, 4, 5, 10 years ago. We always seem to be building monolithic apps. So sort of your traditional Ruby on Rails, Scala play, name your framework. We had these applications that were all built by large groups of teams. They were all in a single monolithic app. And we sort of decided that might not be the best idea for a lot of different reasons, one of which you'll hear all the time about Conway's Law. And sort of Conway's Law being mostly about software is built in the way that the organization is set up. And that's for a very specific reason. And that's because as you scale that organization, communication's hard and it creates friction. And so when we started to build agile teams, we started to come around to this piece where like, well, maybe we separate the app up a bit, and we went to micro front ends, right? So sort of, or not micro front ends, microservices. So the concept of microservices, as we all know, is let me separate this out a little bit in terms of having individual teams be able to be subject matter experts and own that specific area. And that's the microservice part of it's really good for the engineers. You'll hear me talk a lot about sort of autonomy, that I care a lot about engineers finding joy in what they do. And I think that autonomy has some part to do, not anarchy, but autonomy in that piece. And so, you know, when you look at microservices, it allowed teams to build business logic in a way that was somewhat independent. But we still had this monolithic UI. We still built everything in a single sort of UI framework up front. And it actually turns out to be not as good for engineers in the sense of I build my thing, whether it's device protection, I build it independently, but then I still end up in this sort of cross-dependent world of all of these different apps. And if there are dozens of teams, 50, 80 teams, that can be really hard to get my work through. It's good for the customer and the customer experience because they get a single seamless experience, but not as good for the engineer. And so what you also could do, and this is what you actually saw at Asurion quite a bit, is to actually have vertical apps. So think of them as separate domains or subdomains within. So I want to file a claim because my son just cracked his screen and I need to have it repaired. I might go to deviceprotection.phoneclaim.com, or I'm going to go to tech experts if I want to get some help in, how to use my device or how to set up my network or things like that. I'd go to a separate website, or I'm going to update my profile, another website again. And that turns out to actually get worse the larger the organization grows, because you have all of these sort of disparate places to go. It's sort of like, I want to do business with a company, but I'm driving all over town to try to find which department to hit. And what we really wanted was a seamless experience. And so this is actually quite good for engineers to a degree, in the sense of they can independently release, they can independently develop, they can independently build. But for customers, it's not as great because they can't find the things they want, and we don't feel like a unified company. And so what our goal is seamless user experience and autonomous teams, right? For the users, we want them to have the feel of one site. And for the teams, we want them to be independent. And so, from the perspective of what is a micro front end, it's an architectural style where independently deliverable front end applications, think React app, right? I have multiple React apps in those stacks. Can I tie them together, compose them, right? Compositional pattern, in a way that the customer sees it as one thing. So the teams are independent, but the app itself is unified. And there's some real power in that. Now, if you want to simplify that definition, loosely speaking, a micro front end is sort of like a microservice for UI, right? It's this way that I can separate this monolithic thing separately. And you'll hear me talk, we talk all the time at Asurion, we don't talk about micro front ends, we talk about micro experiences. And the distinction is not all that different, but I think there's a key part to it. And what that is micro front end is very sort of tech forward, right? Geek forward. And that's cool, it feels good to me, but it's not customer forward or customer experience forward or user forward. And what it turns out is that when we figure out, just like with microservices, it's hard to figure out how do I separate the domains. In the case of micro front ends, if I think of them as micro experiences, I just cracked my screen phone. I need to schedule a repair today where they come to my house, or I want to back up my photos, or I want to check the network, check my network to make sure all my devices are updated, that kind of stuff that we might build. Those are all individual experiences. And then even like, I don't mean to say even, but the designers, product, they can all get engaged as part of it. They get it. And so we talk about MXs sort of interchangeably with micro front end. And so if you choose a micro front end approach, there's basically three ways to do it. First is we can live together. Think monorepo, right? We have all of our teams. They all live in a single repository. They code together, they get the benefits of the shared tooling, et cetera. They build together and they deploy a single artifact or set of artifacts. Build together is giving a little more autonomy in the sense of each of the teams might have separate repositories, but what I'm going to leverage is we're going to build in a single build pipeline, bringing either the artifacts together, or we might even sort of extract the source code and do the builds together that way. And that way I get a single artifact going out again, and then run together. And run together is sort of the most autonomous side, and it actually fit very well for Asurion. In our case, we had dozens of teams with lots of capabilities that were all actually in production. And so what we wanted to do was to sort of unify those teams, allow them to continue to build, code, do all the things they were doing independently, but to take and compose that into a single interface. And I'll give you an example of like, why isn't it better? Like, shouldn't everybody be in the same build? Like, doesn't that give us more confidence? And really the I don't know, the good example would be, let's imagine there's a set of teams and each team might have different requirements as to how they release. Maybe one team has regulatory compliance that they've got to go through, or a legal review, or a different set of managers want to review it and they want to be extra tight on that. And another team, maybe they don't have the same requirements. They still have to go through reviews, but maybe they're less, right? And so if we were to bundle them all into a single process, a single pipeline in that way, it sort of couples together. And then basically every team is constrained by the same process that could be onerous, which is only required for one. And that's just one example of how that kind of thing can come to be. In our case, we wanted our teams to run together, to be able to autonomously deploy in what they were doing. And so if you think about Asurion and sort of what we want, single interface for the customer, what it looks like under the covers is this. You've got a single root app, right? And think of that like a glorified router. It knows how to mount and unmount the individual micro experiences. You have a set of utility libraries that we'll talk about in a sec. And then under the covers, these are all MXs. So these are actually independent teams that have their own source code repository. They own their own experiences. They have their own build process, their own release process. And they're able to sort of work autonomously. And this all comes together into a single application, single website that's unified. And so in our case, we actually went through a process where we reviewed more than a half dozen, less than a dozen, 8 or 10 different frameworks that previously existed, open source frameworks and otherwise. And we ended up coming down on Single SPA. Single SPA, I believe, was originally from the folks at Canopy. Joel Denning is the tech lead in that, and they've done just a tremendous job. For us, it was very aligned to where we wanted to be because we wanted to run together, where we're going to assemble in the browser these experiences, and we're going to allow the teams to independently deploy their own modules. It's very aligned to that. The documentation is great. The community is really good. They have a Slack workspace that you can join. You can see the roadmap of the core contributors, but you can also get help along the way, and it's actually pretty responsive. So we've been super happy. I definitely suggest checking that out. One thing on the other ones, it wasn't that any of them were bad. They were all pretty good. They might have really leaned in if you're looking for, like, we want to live together. You might choose a different framework, or we want to build together, different framework. Single SPA for us felt more comfortable that way. So framework components wise, there's 4, and I'll show you where they sort of lay out in just a moment. One is that you have a root config, and the root config, again, that glorified router. We try to keep it absolutely as thin as possible so that we don't add dependencies in for our developers. Second is applications. So those are, when I say MXs, it's, I want to go file a claim. It's a micro experience. That would be an MX. Think of it as anything that would have its own path. So I want to file a claim. I might go to /protection under my domain. I want to see the photos that I backed up, or look at them or edit them. I might go to /photos. Same thing for the others. Parcels, think of those like widgets. So it's really cool to be able to combine all these apps, all these single page apps into one thing. But where it really gets powerful and actually seamless is when I can combine them into a single screen. So I want to log in, I want to see my dashboard. I want it to show me that there's a device that has a claim going. I want to see the photos my wife uploaded, in there. So I have these widgets in this dashboard. Well, that's great for the consumer. That's not great for the dashboard team if they I don't want them to have to figure out all of the logic to bring that into their screen for all of the other teams. Wouldn't it be great if the claims team could create their own widget and it gets placed in the dashboard and then that shows up for the consumer? Or wouldn't it be great if the photos team could sort of mac out their gallery thing that they're going to put on that screen that's better for them? That's really what parcels are. It allows teams to independently develop widgets that can be included in other MXs and helping. And then finally, utility modules, which you can think of those as shared libraries. There's shared libraries that within your Webpack config, you would actually exclude. So they're brought in from the application. And so if you look here, we talked before, glorified router. It contains an import map as well as basically the registration of all the MXs. So it knows, oh, you're going to protection. Let me bring up the claims MX. Let me load that module, which is a React app unto itself, mount it in the browser and show it to the consumer kind of thing. I also have these utility libraries. So every one of these MXs probably needs theming, and they probably need authentication and logging and feature flagging, et cetera. And so those are those excluded modules. What will happen is I, as a customer, I come in, I use the dashboard. Because of that, it's going to load React, theming, authentication, and so on. And then I click to go look at a claim. And when I click that as a consumer, it's going to say, oh, okay, you need, these 4 out of 5 libraries or something. They're already loaded in the browser. And so therefore, claims actually loads much quicker than it would otherwise because it doesn't have to bundle all of those resources into a single place. Note also, again, all of these teams running independent. So I'm going to jump quickly into, I just want you to get a feel for what the developer experience is, because I think that's one of the most important parts to me. Where traditionally, let's say I joined the photos team, and I always use them. I don't know why, I think it's easy to remember. So I joined the photos team. It's my first day I come in. In the past, what I would have done is I'm going to download the app or the set of repos to allow me to combine all of this stuff and run it on my machine. So if it's a mono repo, I'm pulling the repo of everybody. If it's separate repos, I've got to do a little bit of sort of orchestration to tie it all together. And then I'm going to do, yarn install, yarn start, and then the whole thing's going to load up, except the yarn install takes a while because it's everything. In this new world, the first thing I do is I actually just go look at the app. Then I clone the repo for just my part. So I'm on the photos team. I don't load everybody's repos or everybody's artifacts. I just mine. After I install and start, I'm going to use a little tool in the browser to let me override the application that's currently running and stable to just load mine, and review my changes, and then push application code. Now, I'll say that's my preferred way to do it. That tends to be the trend we see happening at Asurion. You can also run it standalone. It's not prescriptive on that, but I think it's simpler this way. It's just a little bit of a mind shift. So this is going to be an example. This is actually a quick video of this app you can get to online, react.microfrontends.app. It's from the Single Spot folks. They did a really good job of example apps of showing you how to set this stuff up. And so I just joined the planets team is what we're going to sort of look at here. My first step is I'm going to go in, I'm going to look at it. It actually is Star Wars memory or sort of links. And then I'm going to go to the repo. So I just looked at the site. I'm on planets. I need to enhance a button in that app. So the first thing I'm going to do is go get the repo. So I'm going to clone it locally. So as I clone, it's just the planets repo. So you're going to see that's super straightforward and quick because it's just that piece. Then I'm going to yarn install and yarn start. So typical stuff, it's going to do the typical install process, but it's just for that one piece for the planets team. Then when I yarn start, I'm just going to set a port on it because I'm going to override that in the browser in a moment. So I run through my install. This will take just a moment. I'm going to do yarn start with a port of 9001. That's completely arbitrary on my part. It's just the thing that I'm going to use, because if I wanted to load 2 micro experiences, I might do 9001 for one of them, 9002 for another. So you can see here's where I'm starting at 9001. It's going to load in Webpack. And once that's loaded, I'm going to switch back over to my browser. Go back to the micro front end. And actually, the way that I always feel most comfortable is I'll switch off the MX. You don't actually have to do that. So then what you saw me do here is I'm clicking in the little tool down at the bottom. This is for your development environments only. And it basically allows you to see all of the mounted, effectively modules that are being assembled in the front end. So you can see things like RxJS and people and navbar and planets. And the router is figuring out which one to load when. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go override the one for planets, which you can see right up here, and say, hey, when we need to go to that part of the app, use my local host. One of the nice conveniences here, you'll see I just put in 9001. It automatically assumes that it's localhost if you put a port there and nothing else. And now I've reloaded, and this is actually running from my local machine. And so, and I can show you that, because what I'm going to do is now I'm going to execute on my job, which is to modify a button. So this is just a standard React app. And all I do is add the word even and save in this React component. When I save, by the time I get back to the browser, it's already refreshed. But the magic here is everything else is happening in the cloud except just my part, which is a really nice integration piece. So the final thing I just wanted to mention, and then I'll open up for questions, happy to talk about whatever, is sort of, okay, I can sort of see, like, why is this kind of good and why would it be helpful to me? I want to answer a couple questions up front. One question that gets asked all the time is, like, when is it appropriate to use micro front ends? I don't get it. How is it different from single page apps? And I would say for us, and at least for me, micro front ends or micro experiences make a lot of sense as you scale the number of teams, because you have a need to, like, sort of collaborate and give teams ownership of things while still allowing them to autonomously deliver. If I was doing a startup again and I wanted to get a team going and we got to be super fast, I don't know that I would use micro front ends at the beginning part of it. And the reason is that speed is like the most important thing to me at that time. So I would probably either build a React or a Vue app and get going. And sort of the magic of single SPA is I don't have to choose now. I can wait till I need to scale. And then I just shim that little root app in. I make some slight modifications to the to my app.js, and there's helpers in the single SPA platform, and then I mount that app into the single SPA framework, and now I have a micro front end architecture, and I didn't have to do a whole lot. So the migration path is easy. So simple answer: if you're at less than 5 teams, if you're getting towards 10 and 20 and 30 teams that all have to sort of work together, I think it starts to make a lot of sense because you can have some autonomy. If you do go down that path, final thing I'll just mention, for us, I feel like we were successful in moving this forward because we had sort of 3 sort of organizational concepts. One was a platform steering committee. I run the platform team. We don't own the platform. The platform itself is owned by the organization as a whole. So meaning all of those teams that are dependent on it, they have a say in it. We get together every week for 30 minutes. We do a lean coffee style where we basically vote for our topics. We go through those topics in a time-boxed fashion. Everybody gets a vote in that. And we're able to come to decisions by the end of that half hour. And we almost never actually have to vote just because the voting is sort of there. People, I don't know, maybe they're incentivized to jump in. We tend to be a group that always sort of seeks to come to solutions together, so it's easy. But that steering committee, I think, is key because it means everybody buys in. The second is the enablement team, which is the team that I run. And we have 3 jobs. 1, we manage the app root. 2, we're sort of evangelists inside. So our job is to help all of the MX teams to use it and to contribute to it. Really to we're judged by 2 things. How many teams come on board and how did they feel about it? Like, did they like it? Because if we're causing them pain, it's probably pretty bad. Our job is to bring them joy and make their life easier. And then third is we're there to educate. So we do reference implementations of the, of MXs. We dog food our own platform. We also, in terms of what we do, we put on a mini conference. We call it the Academy, once a quarter, where we do 2 half days because we're spanning time zones in Tel Aviv and Nashville and Sterling and Pacific time, et cetera, where we do 2 sort of 3-hour groupings where we'll do about 10 sessions. We record them, we then split them up, and then we cut them into learning paths for new engineers. And then every quarter, we just update what's changed. And then we replace the original videos so we have an evergreen sort of training capability. And then finally, the MX teams, which are the teams themselves, the people that build the capabilities for our users to use, our customers. And so they're a big part. They contribute in exactly the same way as the platform team. They propose concepts. It really is an inner source culture that we're seeking. So I think that's pretty important for success, is sort of going it as a group instead of going it as a team. So anyway, that's it. I appreciate everyone listening to me. If you have any questions, I'm happy to open up for questions, but if you do want to get in touch, I encourage you to reach out. If you want to learn anything more about Asurion and some of the fun stuff we're doing, if you want to sort of learn about opportunities we have, definitely give me a ring.
Thank you very much, Neil. We do have some questions.
Great.
I think before I start with the question, my key takeaway from your talk was to do it incrementally, like not jump into microfrontends immediately. You can start iterating with it as soon as your organization start to scale. This is my takeaway. And let's start with the questions. So first question is about module federation. So Webpack 5 came out with this groundbreaking kind of feature, which is called module federation. And I believe it can do a lot of good to the micro front-end development. So
yeah, absolutely.
Have you tried it?
Yeah, I can sort of respond. So when am I going to come to that? I guess I'll talk about it now. So in terms of the Webpack module federation, they're not mutually exclusive. So we ended up using single SPA in part because module federation was sort of just becoming a thing. And so we needed a path to go forward. And it's not mutually exclusive in the sense of with module federation, you can set it up very much like you would in this way with sort of these separated modules, excluded modules that you can then bring together and compose. You can compose them in single SPA, or you can compose them using Webpack itself. We haven't gotten that far into it yet because we're sort of waiting for it to mature.
Yeah. It's pretty new feature, and I guess single SPA is much more mature and has some record. Yeah.
Well, and let me add, I don't know that it's an either or proposition, right? Like, and I think you hit sort of the nail on the head there in the sense of, I think one of the key benefits is I want to be able to iterate and innovate as I go forward. Like today we're a React shop, and I wouldn't recommend, like sometimes people talk on micro front ends about like, oh, well, we can take and put Vue modules in with React modules within, et cetera. And it's not that you can't do that. You absolutely can. I don't know that I would recommend it as sort of a long-term strategy, because I think actually ThoughtWorks called it, what did they say? Micro front end anarchy was a term that they gave.
Yeah.
And so I think let's be great at like doing React components and figure out a way to compose those apps together. And then if we want to try something in the future, whatever the next thing is, I can do one little piece and I have a migration path to get there and then arrest whatever was there before.
Thank you. So we have another question.
Sure.
what are the differences between single SPA to using load balancers?
Oh, it's a great question. So single SPA essentially allows us, it's funny, I had this in an internal meeting. They were like, are you just saying that all this is a router? And why wouldn't we just use load balancing? Single SPA allows us to maintain that single JavaScript memory space, if you will, right? Load balancers is more to the point of like, in the past, I would have separate apps and I can how do I say this? I can scale the level of my app in a way that it can serve the number of customers I need, so I can spread it across a cluster or something. I think typically you're going to talk about that separate subdomain thing. If you do that, we could take and use load balancers in terms of like application load balancers to take those separate paths and say, okay, well, I'm going to /claims. So let me pull that React application and load it in the browser. But in that case, I lose all of the sort of performance benefits of the utility modules. So I have a full bundle that I brought everything. I brought React, I brought my authentication, everything. And I'm trying to load that into the browser. Then I switch and I go to photos and I got to load the whole thing again because it's all sort of bundled together. We make use of load balancers in as much as it helps us when we need to load the modules, but we still use single SPA as that router to figure out how to mount and unmount the pieces in a single threaded manner, in a single JavaScript environment.
Okay, so last question, because we are running out of time, so real quick. Do these microservices or microfrontends load on the go or as the routing changes? Or you simply load all of them at once?
Oh, no, yeah, great question. Yeah, that'd be horrible if we loaded them all at once. They are lazy loaded as needed. So for example, I showed that theming library is one of the utility libraries. Let's say that, let's use theming. I go to the dashboard loads theming, it lazy loads it because it was the first one to request it. Then I switch and I go to photos. And when I go to photos, I also still need that theming library. It has already been lazy loaded, so I get the benefit of that. So it's more performant. What I would want to avoid is trying to load everything at once because it would just crush, particularly our mobile users. The one other thing I'd say to that is we do preload some modules that we know every one of them is going to need because it just helps us to be faster. So we might bundle that into the app root, but we avoid it as much as we humanly can.
Oh, okay. So thank you very much, Neil. Your talk was super. I hope the people here learned a lot about microfrontends, and thank you very much for coming.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So for those of you who just joined and don't know about our giveaway, every event we are doing a giveaway. And this event we are giving away a laptop sleeve. And all you have to do to win this laptop sleeve is to share on social media our event, the YouTube link with the monthly dev hashtag, and we will pick the 10 most creative shares and we will send you the laptop sleeve. Make sure to leave your DM open so we can contact you in case you win. For our next speaker for today, I've been using his open source libraries for quite some time, especially the React testing library. I can't be more excited to invite Dodds on stage, so please make some noise in the comments.
Hey everyone.
It's so great to have you here.
It's good to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Really appreciate it. And thanks all the nice comments wishing me luck.
Yeah, people seem very excited. And yeah, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, so let's do it. Good luck.
Okay, cool. I will share my screen. Thank you everybody for coming, and I'm excited to talk with you about being confident in shipping React applications. And just one note as an aside, I was thinking about this morning, and I've actually delivered this talk maybe like 5 or 6 times in the last few years. And most of you probably haven't seen it. And early when I was just getting started speaking, I would never repeat a talk because I felt like it was cheating and it wasn't like giving the people the way, like what they wanted or needed or whatever. And then I realized that there are just so many people in the world who haven't seen that talk before, that it actually was really valuable. And on top of that, I can make the talk better and better every single time. So there may be a few of you who have seen a form of this talk in the past, but most of you haven't. And so I'm glad to be able to present this to you today. Okay, so this is a bunch of stuff about me. You'll find my link to these slides at the bottom here. It's kcd.im/confident-react. And so you can look into all of this stuff a little bit more whenever you want. So I like to start my talks out with expectations. So this talk is a discussion on how to test web applications, specifically React, effectively. And a lot of the things that I talk about aren't like actually specific to React, but yeah, all the examples are React. And I'm also giving a history lesson of testing library, where it came from and why it is the way that it is. This is not going to be, I'm not going to talk about like functional or end-to-end testing, and hopefully it's not a boring talk. So let's go ahead and get started. So my first question, I'm going to ask a couple questions to you that I want you to just kind of think about and try to answer, see if you come up with the same answer that I do. And the first question is, why do we test our software? Some people like to test their software because it helps them develop their software faster, especially like TDD or something, test-driven development. And that is definitely a reason to write tests. But why do we run our tests in CI? Like, why do you run your test before it gets to production? And the reason that we do that is to have confidence that when the software gets to production, it's not going to fall over and break and cause mayhem in the world and everything. So the tests that we're writing so that they run before we ship, it's all about confidence. And so if that's the reason that we write tests, then that should be like the main focus of all of the tests that we write, is we want to write tests that give us the most amount of confidence. And confidence is something that we buy with our time. Okay, so it's something like writing tests is an activity that we can do with our time. And the reason that we do that, the reason we're exchanging our time, is so we can get confidence. And so you want to get the most amount of benefit for the least amount of cost of your time. And so with that, we want to think about what gives us the most confidence. Where can we get the most confidence from? And to understand that, we need to get an understanding of, okay, where does confidence come from? How do tests give us confidence? And this quote is, the more your tests resemble the way your software is used, the more confidence they can give you. I actually said this a few years ago, and you can go find it on Twitter. But I stand very strongly on this. The closer you can get your tests to resemble the way your software is used, the more confidence it can give you. And so you should be focusing all of your energies when you're writing your tests on making those resemble the way your software is used. So how should we think about writing these sorts of tests? What kinds of tests give us the most confidence with this in mind? Well, manual tests, those will give us the most confidence. There's nothing that you can get, like you can't get more confident than like clicking through every single situation and saying, yes, I clicked through it and I know that it works and it looks exactly the way that it should. The problem is that there are human shortcomings. So just a little story. One of the first companies that I ever worked for, we didn't really have much automated testing. And so before we would deploy, this would be like every 2 weeks or so we would deploy. And everybody in the company, whether you're in sales or well, actually, no, they kind of sheltered the sales folks. We were a startup, really desperate for people. But like all of engineering, most of people in the company would go to this little web app that somebody wrote to have a bunch of test cases, which they were working on automating, but yeah, it was a disaster. It's much better now, I'm sure. But yeah, so we would choose a test case, and we would follow along with the instructions, and we do it would say. And I know I'm not the only one who did this, and I am ashamed that I did, but there were a couple of tests that technically failed where I would click here, click there, do this, do that, and it wouldn't actually do what it was supposed to. And I would just say, I'm guessing that's a fluke. And I would mark it as green. And the reason is because if you mark it as red, then you have to like do up a little report to explain what happened. I didn't want to do that. And so, yeah, I am ashamed of this. But this is just the fact that humans are really bad at repetitive tasks. We don't like doing it, and we have oversights. And so we can't just do manual testing. And on top of that, of course, like it's very expensive. Hiring a bunch of actual humans to go through every edge case of your app would be just very expensive and time intensive. So we overcome human shortcomings by automation. And that's literally like all software is intended to automate what a human would take too long for a human to do. Or would just not be practical for a human to do. Tests are no different. Any software is just about automating what humans couldn't do practically. And so testing software is the exact same thing. The problem with automation is that, remember, where we get the most confidence comes from how close our test resembles the way the software is used. And is our software used by automation test suites? No, our software is used by users. And so as soon as we start automating stuff, we're taking a little step away from the confidence level that we get from manual tests. But we're doing it for practical reasons. So this is an important concept to grasp when we're talking about testing. Is it's 100% all about trade-offs that you're making and making testing practical. You just can't do it manually, so we have to do it automated. But we want to avoid throwing out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak. We want to try and make our automation resemble what a manual tester would do, because the more our test resembles the way software is used, the more confidence it can give us. So many of you have probably seen the testing pyramid. There are different levels of testing. There's end-to-end testing. That's kind of like you have a browser that pops up and you have a little robot that fills out all the forms and stuff. Then you have an integration testing. And when we're talking about UI, this is like you have a page of components and you interact with the components that are on that page. So it's not like the entire app necessarily. It's more focused on a single page or a set of components. And then unit testing is much lower level. It's like pure functions and maybe an individual component, depending on how you define a unit. But the testing pyramid kind of says, hey, focus most of your time on the unit tests, and then do a little bit of integration tests and then even fewer end-to-end tests. And the reason for this is because unit tests are really cheap. They run fast. They're easier to write. End-to-end tests are expensive. They take longer. They can be finicky, and they're potentially harder to write, harder to get things set up for sure. And then unit tests are also much faster, end-to-end tests are much slower. The problem is that the testing pyramid was created on a foundation or an assumption that is no longer the case. So here at the bottom of the blog post where this was introduced by Martin Fowler, it says, the pyramid is based on the assumption that broad stack tests are expensive, slow, and brittle compared to more focused tests such as unit tests. While this is usually true, there are exceptions. If my high-level tests are fast, reliable, and cheap to modify, then lower-level tests aren't needed. Now, I wouldn't go so far as to say not needed necessarily, but they're definitely this assumption when the testing pyramid was introduced is no longer true, at least not for front-end UI applications. Our higher level tests, the end-to-end and integration tests, they are a lot cheaper. They're faster and less brittle than the more focused unit tests. And there's a reason why we want to go a little bit more top-heavy on the testing pyramid. And so when I saw this and started thinking about this a little bit, I actually created a new thing called the testing trophy. And the testing trophy takes those three things and actually adds a base on it for static testing. The testing pyramid was like primarily for people using statically typed languages. So they didn't really think about static as testing. That was just like writing a program. But for us in JavaScript land, static is important. And so we have stuff like TypeScript and ESLint and Prettier, all as tools to help you catch the simple problems. And then we have unit integration and end-to-end. And so most of my time testing UI is focused on integration. I get the most bang for my buck in that layer. And then I have a lot of stuff in the end-to-end test layer, because the tools that we have are really good. They're really fast. And if you do things right, then they're less flaky than they used to be. And then unit tests are primarily focused for that business logic that's pretty complicated. I can put it in a pure function. I just test the heck out of it, and then we're good to go. But most of my coverage for my applications coming from this middle area, and these arrows still hold true. It's still faster to run a single unit test than an end-to-end test, and it takes less time to write those tests as well. But the important thing that the pyramid was missing, or that we miss from just these arrows here, is what I call the confidence coefficient. And so the lower level problems here, like the things that are solved by lower level problems, like static testing, that's going to solve problems with typos and stuff, right? So really lower level thing or simple problems that you'd probably catch in a higher level test, but that's kind of where the focus of these lower level test tools are for. Those are the types of things that it'll catch. And the higher level things will solve big problems. Like when I'm going through this flow and I add this item to my cart, it doesn't actually get added to my cart. That's not something you'd probably catch in a lower level unit test, because it requires the integration of a lot of different pieces. But you would catch that in an end-to-end test. And so because a single end-to-end test can give you more confidence than a single unit test, that's what we call the confidence coefficient. That's the difference. And that's why we want to be a little bit more top-heavy than the testing pyramid typically was, because we don't have that, we're not shackled by that previous assumption anymore. Okay, so let's talk about something more like an actual example. So I want to ask you, how would you test this sort of UI? So this is a login. We have, or a registration, we have a username, password, and a register. And so the first thing that you should think when you're presented with a component that you want to test, or some experience, is what would I do if I was a manual tester? How would I manually test this? So I'd find the username, I'd type that in, I'd find the password, I'd type that in, and then I click on register and make sure that what happens should happen, or what should happen does happen. So that's how I would test it manually, and that's what my test should be. So a few years ago now, the state of the art was using Jest, JSDOM, and Enzyme to test any React anything. And I was preparing to teach how to write tests and with React. And as I was preparing to do this, I found that my philosophy around writing good, solid tests, when applied using Enzyme, just did not hold up very well. And so I'm going to give you a quick example of why that is, or like what it looked like, and why there are some problems with the old state of the art. And we're going to kind of go through this pretty quick because I don't have a ton of time, but you can find all of these examples and everything at this link. Unfortunately, Code Sandbox currently has a bug right now, and so the tests aren't passing. The only one passing is Enzyme, actually, which is kind of ironic, but that's a bug. It works locally, which is why I'm going to be doing this locally. So here's just kind of a basic version of that form component. So we have this login. Here's our form. It has an onSubmit handler, and this login component is intended to be rendered, and then the onSubmit would go and make the request. And so we're just testing the login by itself. We have a labeled input for the username, a labeled input for the password, and then a button for submit. And then our form just takes that onSubmit, and it converts all the element values of the form into an object of all those values. So yeah, it's actually kind of cool. This is pretty clever way to handle forms. So if you're working on forms, you can take a look at what that does. It's kind of interesting. But anyway, what we end up with is onSubmit is called with a username and a password. That's all there is to it. So it's pretty simple thing going on here. So let's take a look at the Enzyme test. Interestingly, Enzyme, I hate throwing it under the bus, but you really shouldn't be using Enzyme. For one, when hooks came out, it took forever for Enzyme to only sort of support hooks, and it only sort of does. And then React 17 has been out for like 4 months, and they still don't have support for React 17. So we're still using React 16, so I can demo this for you. I strongly advise against using Enzyme, not just for that reason, but because it allows or has all these problems I'm going to show you. So this is what the test ends up looking like once you've configured Enzyme and everything. We're going to have a submit handler function that we're going to pass to the onSubmit prop so that we can make assertions on the fact that it's called once and it's called with the right stuff. I'm going to go and find the username input. Just like, remember, we had that GIF that showed, okay, let's find the username input, type in the username, find the password, type in the password, and then submit the form. And so to do this in Enzyme, this is where I was when I was preparing this workshop about testing. I was going to say, okay, here's what we do with Enzyme. So you mount the component, you get this wrapper thing, you call find input, you get the first input because it's the first input in our form, and then you call this host nodes thing, which I hated. I was like, what? This took me forever to figure out this is what I needed to do, but this is what allows you to get the underlying thing that the wrapper is wrapping. And then you get the instance, which in this case, because it's a DOM node, that's going to be the DOM node. And that's all that I want. I want the DOM node so I can set its value. And we'll do the same thing for the password, except for this one, that's the second input. So at index 1, and then say, I need no password. And that's our password, of course, because it's Chuck Norris. He doesn't need a password. And then we'll find the form and simulate a submit. And with that, we can verify that everything was called properly. So there are a couple of problems with this, aside from the extra work you have to do just to get some DOM nodes. What would happen if I renamed the form component? So let's say I'm just going to do a quick refactor here, registration form, and we'll save that. My test will get rerun, and you'll notice, in fact, I should probably be focusing just on the Enzyme test. Yeah, but you'll notice the React DOM and React Testing Library tests, they still pass. But Enzyme fails. And the reason that it fails is because right here, I'm saying, hey, wrapper, I want you to go find the component named form. Now, who cares that the component is named form? Not the user. The user doesn't care. It doesn't make any difference for them. When they're going through this form right here, do they need to know that this thing's named form? No, of course not. And so if your test needs to know something that your user doesn't, then not only are you stepping away from simulating the way that your software is used, but you're also adding another user to your tests. So your tests actually have two users. They have the end user who's interacting with the component, and then they have the developer user who's rendering the component to the page. So those are the two users you need to care about. But if you're doing something in your test that neither of those users know about or even care about, then you've added a third user. We call this the test user. And that user isn't using your API. They don't care about you. They hate you. They take your time, and they're not giving you any money. End users, they may not like you very much, and they may take your time, but at least they're paying you, or at least they should be. So we don't like the test user. You want to stay away from the test user. And because of the way that we've written our test here, we have we've created a test user. We are the test user using this form. And so no, we don't want to be grabbing things based off of the component name at all. We want to avoid that for sure. Another problem that we have in our test is right here, so remember the end user comes around here and they say, hey, I want to go find the username and fill in my username. They're not saying, let me find the first field and fill in my username. So, but that's what we're doing. We're saying, okay, the first input, that's where we're going to put in the username. But what if I add another labeled input in here, and the label is first name, and maybe this is an optional field or something like that. I've totally just busted my test. This isn't going to work anymore because now I'm filling in the username in the first name field, and the password is going to be empty, and the username is going to have my password in it. So that's another thing where just because of the way that or the limitations that Enzyme has, you are forced to do these sorts of things. And so you want to, as you're working through writing your test, you really want to make sure that your test is resembling the way that your software is going to be used. And end users are not going to be saying, hey, I want the first input. They're going to be saying, I want the input that's labeled username. And so those are a couple of the things that, like, when I was working through with Enzyme, I just was like, I'm going to have to tell them this big long list of things to not ever do with Enzyme. And then I finally decided, hey, you know what? What if I just, well, actually, in preparation for this, I always like to say, okay, let's pretend we don't have an abstraction. Let's just do it ourselves. And so I built this. And when and this is just literally, let's create a DOM element and let's render our component to that DOM element. And so to demonstrate this. And when I did that, I realized that, wait a second, like, this is actually cleaner. If I added a couple little helpers here, this would be way cleaner than what Enzyme offers me. So I don't need Enzyme at all. And then I don't need this list of things not to do. I just throw that away and say, just do these things. And so I made a little helper, and that's what React Testing Library is. And so you can dive into this a little bit more. For time purposes, I'm not going to take you through all of this stuff, but it basically, here we're still getting the first and second input. React Testing Library helps us avoid having to do that, but we don't care about the name of the form. We are dispatching an actual submit event. I forgot to mention that I think Enzyme will fall over if we leave out this submit button. Enzyme will continue to pass when it absolutely should not be passing. But in any case, when I created this, I was like, oh man, I just need to make a couple of helper functions to make this better. And that's where React Testing Library came from. So I'll give you a quick rundown of this. So here with React Testing Library, you get render and you get screen. So render is how you put things on the page. Screen is how you get things off of the page. And then we also have user event, and that's how you interact with the things that you have on the page. So here we're going to first render our login. We're going to get the username input, and we're going to get it by its role. So if, in case you weren't aware, all elements on the page have an implicit role. For lots of them, it's called generic, and so it's not useful. But for inputs and stuff like that, that's a text box. For a password field, that actually doesn't have a role, and that's why we're using get by label text. But you'll have like a text box, you'll have a list item, a whole bunch of other things. And then, of course, when you're building an accessible like tabs UI or accordion, then sometimes you'll specify a specific role. But most of the time, you actually don't need to specify a role. It's already implicit. And so React Testing Library gives you a mechanism by which you can grab that. So we're going to say, hey, get me the text box. And the accessible name, this is platform specific, like that's what it's called. It's an accessible name, matches this regex of username. So get me the text box that's labeled username. And now I've got my username input. This right here gives me a ton of confidence. I not only get confidence that I'm able to get that field, and that field is actually being rendered, but I also have the confidence that the label is associated to the input. That gives me a lot more confidence than what I had with Enzyme. And it also helps me avoid bugs where I have the label and I have the input, but they're not associated in any way. So it's really important that you keep that association for accessibility reasons. And React Testing Library just kind of gives that to you out of the box. If your component isn't accessible, then it's hard to test. And so you make it accessible, and now the world's a better place. So we're going to get the username input, and then we're going to use user event to type into the username input these values. Now, what's cool about user event is it actually fires all of the events that a user would end up firing. So rather than just setting the value itself or triggering the onChange handler or something, we're actually firing a click on the input and then key down and key up, and all going through all of that to make sure that all of the events are fired in the right way. And we do the same thing for the password, and then we click on the submit button and we verify everything is called correctly. So that is React Testing Library, and it's awesome. And that's where React Testing Library came from, was just a desire to have a library that encapsulates the philosophies around testing that I've developed over the years that I've been testing. And so, yeah, here, and oh, by the way, you notice the octopus. This is testing library. So there are testing library implementations for all sorts of frameworks. After I built React Testing Library, I realized a lot of this, this code that I was writing had nothing to do with React. And so I extracted that into DOM testing library. And so there are a bunch on top of that. Okay, so React testing library has a couple functions in there to help you with React specifically, like render, and then you can use user event or fire event to interact with the thing that you rendered. You can use wait for asynchronous things. You say, okay, wait for this assertion to pass, or wait for this element to be removed from the page. So you have a loading indicator. You want to wait for that to go away before you continue on your tests. These utilities make for tests that resemble the way that your software is used. And render gives you back a mechanism for re-rendering. So if you have a use effect that it depends on props or something, and you want to test that, then you re-render it with new props, and that's what that's for. And then you have unmount to test like your cleanup for your use effect or whatever. Then you have container and as fragment. Those aren't quite as useful, but they can be useful for like snapshots and other kind of edge case things. And then screen, you have get, query, and find variants of all of the following. So you have get by role that will synchronously get an element by its role, or if you want to verify that something doesn't exist, then you use query, because get is going to throw if it can't find what it's looking for. But if you want to say, hey, it doesn't have a loading indicator, then you can use query and verify that it returns null. Or if what you're looking for is coming in asynchronously, it's not there yet, it's coming in later, then you can use find, and that works basically the same as get, except it's asynchronous. So it'll just keep on waiting until it can find it or it times out. And so then we have by label text, placeholder text, display value, a bunch of these. These are in order of which one you should be using. So if you've been using React Testing Library for a while, make sure that that's where you focus. Most of the time you want to use by role. I realize some of you are probably asking about performance because by role is pretty slow. But I mean, you're more than welcome to help us make it faster. It's doing a lot under the hood and giving you a lot of confidence. So I think that it's worthwhile, but sometimes you may need to stop using by role for a specific situation and use by label text or something like that instead. Okay, and then we have user event. It just allows you to do anything the user does. We've got a bunch of things that the user does, and we can add additional things in the future too. So it's kind of like Cypress has a lot of really cool utilities where you can interact with the page. So a lot of it is some of the things that what Cypress allows you to do. It's pretty cool. If you're using Cypress, there's a Cypress testing library, and I suggest that you use Cypress's utilities instead of user event. This is an async example. I don't have a lot of time to go over it. I'll just mention MSW is a great friend to testing library. If you're making HTTP calls, you want to use MSW to mock those out. And then with those mocked out, then you can just write your test very similar to the way that it appears in your or very similar to the way that a user would use this component. And MSW can make sure that you don't actually make any network requests for that test. It's really cool, and I suggest that you give it a look if you're not already. There are a bunch of examples in here. This is it's on my GitHub called React Testing Library Examples, and you can go take a look at some of those. It's really cool stuff. And that's everything that I have for you. So just some resources. Like I said, we've got testing library implementation for really anywhere there's a DOM. You can have a testing library implementation there. And also, I am the creator of epicreact.dev and testingjavascript.com. So if you're into React, then definitely check out epicreact.dev. Lots of free stuff on there, as well as the biggest React course from a single instructor in the world. And testingjavascript.com is the same, but testing. So it's awesome, and you should definitely give it a look. If any of you actually have gone through any of this stuff, let us know in the comments what you think of it. Hopefully it's good. And that's everything that I have to share with you. Thank you all so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Kent. Actually, I would like to second the awesomeness of React Testing Library. I'm using it for a few months already, and I love how opinionated it towards user-facing kind of testing, as you mentioned. Kind of forces you into specific patterns, and it's really cool. So thank you for creating this library.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that.
And let's proceed to the questions. So first question is, what is the tipping point in terms of complexity, whereby testing becomes a necessity?
It's going to be different for everybody. It depends on what's really important to you in your application. So, for example, if you're just like my blog, kentcdodds.com does not have much testing at all. I think I have like one Cypress test that just makes sure that it pulls up, so that it renders. It's not important to me if that breaks. If it falls over for a few minutes or even all night, I can wake up in the morning, I fix it, and it's like, whatever. People weren't able to see my blog post for a few hours. Who cares? But if you're a banking application or building airplane software or something, you better believe that your software needs to be tested. Absolutely. So again, software writing tests is no different from writing any other software. You look at the problems on your board and you say, let's sort these problems by priority, and then we'll solve these problems. And on that list of problems, right next to add this feature should be write a test because manually testing this is taking too long. It's no different from anything else. And so, it's not. It has nothing to do with how complex something is. It has everything to do with how do you need to make sure that this doesn't break, and how difficult is it for you to do to test that manually. And if it's important and it's difficult to test manually, then you should write a test for it.
Yeah, so I guess it's kind of combination between business priorities and effort to write this test, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a blog post about this called "Should I Write a Test or Fix a Bug?" That goes into depth more.
Okay, perfect. Next question is, should we use text in test assertions, because texts are dynamics and can even be translated sometimes?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, and I've had it on my list of blog posts to write for like years now. I just need to write it. Even within the testing library maintainers, there is different opinions on this. For me, I prefer rendering my tests with the default language, which in my case is English, and then I test everything with English. I feel like it makes the test easier to write, and it gives me confidence that my I18N solution is connected well with the code. If you're mocking out your I18N solution or something, you're not getting that confidence. Or like maybe the translators or you made a typo in connecting the UI with those with that content. And so by mocking that out, you don't get that confidence. And so I prefer to just go with the default language.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. So we have tons of questions waiting for you in the comments. So please, we don't have enough time. So if you can answer them on YouTube or later on Twitter, I bet people are waiting to see the answers. So
sure, yeah, I can go ahead and go to YouTube and answer. And folks are welcome to come to my Discord. I have office hours every week where I just come on YouTube and answer anybody's questions through my Discord. So if you go to kcd.im/Discord, you can join my Discord and ask me questions on office hours every week.
Perfect. I should join.
Yeah, it's fun.
So thank you very much, Kent. I would like to personally thank you for doing such a great work for the developers community and coming up to this event.
Thank you. I appreciate you inviting me on.
So thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The next talk comes in perfect timing for me personally, because right now in daily.dev, we are evaluating the best tools to create our design system. Please welcome Katerina, and again, do a lot of noise in the comments. Hey, Katerina. 1 second, they can't hear you. Oh, please unmute yourself, because I can.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, how are you?
Good, you?
I'm fine, thank you. A lot of adrenaline rush because of the event.
Yes, indeed.
So are you ready for your talk?
Yeah, I'm ready, and thank you very, very much for inviting me here.
Yeah, thank you for coming. So yeah, the stage is yours, and go ahead. I can't wait to hear your talk.
Thank you. And let me know if there's any trouble at any point. People are not hearing me or they're not seeing my fonts, or just, if there's any trouble, just, yeah. So before I start, as I promised, I would show the kitten. This is Malone. And he may come up again afterwards. So goodbye, Malone, for now. And so today we're going to talk about how to storybook your app with Nx. A few things about myself quickly. I'm a software engineer at Nrwl. I'm the Angular Athens Meetup co-founder. I'm a GDE for Angular, web technologies, and the Google Maps platform. I'm a speaker, an instructor, a mentor, and a cat person, in case you haven't noticed. And I also climb mountains. This is me on top of Mount Olympus, the highest mountain in Greece. So today we'll talk about Storybook and Nx. These two words may be unfamiliar to you, or you may be familiar with one or the other. I'll make sure I'll give you an overview of both and how together they can work and give you the best out of both of them. So the summary of today's talk is, we'll see what Storybook is briefly. We will not, of course, talk about all the features of Storybook because we would need a lot of time. But we will do a brief overview of it. You will understand what it is. We will discuss why someone would want to use Storybook and how Storybook works. Then I'll give you a brief summary of Nx. Then we'll see how Nx helps with Storybook development. And then we'll see both of the tools in action. So let's start with what Storybook is. So in one line, taken from their website, it's an open source tool for developing UI components in isolation. Well, what is that? So with Storybook, what that means is that with Storybook, you can create a story, and we'll see what a story is, for a component. And in that story, you import your components and you describe or write various scenarios or use cases. Up until now, it may sound like a unit test to you, but it's not a unit test or a need-to test. Also, it integrates with most front-end frameworks, including React, Vue, Angular, and Svelte. We'll see this example afterwards. I don't know why I put it here. So why use Storybook? And you will understand why when I explain it, what it is better. So what Storybook does is that it helps you develop entire UIs without needing to start up a complex dev stack. What that means is that you're working on a big application and you have a lot of UI components. In order to see these components in action, you would have to start up your application, start up your dev server, go through the whole scenario of finding that component where you want to test, and actually see how the component looks inside the whole application. Well, with Storybook, you don't have to do that because the component it lets you develop the component in isolation, and it starts up a server, the Storybook server, where it just shows you that component on its own. And you can change it and give it different use cases or scenarios in order to achieve what you want. For example, at the moment, I'm working with a client where they have an enormous code base. And this code base has a lot of different paths. As you can imagine, it's sort of like an e-shop where you have to put up some details here. And if you put them wrong, you go to that path and the other path. And each time I needed to test, for example, my specific erroneous use case, I would have to either mess up the mock data or go through the whole flow again of authenticating and adding my details and everything, just to see that small change in that component. So with Storybook, you can have that component that is at the end of your flow in isolation and just fire it up, give it manually the inputs you want, and you can see change. So this is awesome actually for applications with especially for big applications with a lot of components. So from what I said, you may understand that this will also create a documentation of your UI library or your UI system, which means that if you have a huge application that has a lot of components, what a better way to document them and have like a catalog of all the available components than having Storybook take care of that by you creating small stories, and we will see how these stories are structured, and sort of have this like a catalog of all these components in isolation where somebody can browse them. So you can create your when you have your component library, what I mean here is that you can create the catalog of your component library where, for example, a person from another team may come in and see what components are available, or even you yourself as a developer can see what components are available, or how you can edit them and how to change their props or inputs and everything. Actually, this can help you write less unit tests. You can rely on your stories for these, because if you write detailed stories with lots of scenarios, you can cover use cases. Also, you can easily browse and trigger different states, as I explained. And you can do things like visual testing using Chromatic, which is a tool developed, I think, by people from Storybook, I'm not sure. And you can do other types of things like snapshot testing to see the changes pixel by pixel when the UI has changed, which is super, super helpful. And you can actually automate all these. So instead of just running snapshot tests for your whole application, you can just run some visual testing or your individual components and see what changed where. And this is much faster, which is nice. So how Storybook works, because I'm sure you have a lot of questions of how it works. So the first thing you do is that you take your application. I had prepared 2 demos, one for Angular, one for React, but since we already talked about React and Ken did an awesome presentation that included React, I thought I would give you the React demos. So say you have a React application or whatever you have, it doesn't matter. You just run npx sb init, and this, sb is for Storybook, of course. This will take care of the following things. It will install the required dependencies, so it will install Storybook packages for React, the Storybook core, and whatever else it needs. It will set up the necessary scripts to run and build Storybook. It will add the default Storybook configuration, and it will also add some boilerplate stories to get you started. So it will generate, I think, a story for a header and a button, just just boilerplate ready-made stories for you to just like use as an example. Step 2 is you just add a story file right next to your component file. You import there in your component and draft your scenario. So for example, if you have a React application, for example, with TSX, you would have your test app component TSX, your .spec.tsx, .css or .module CSS, and you would also have your .stories TSX. And in the Angular case, you would have your .component.ts, .component.stories.ts, .spec.ts. So it would just be one more file in your setup. So if your React component looks like this is a very simple component. You have some props here, a title, like a string, a boolean, and a number. And your component would look like this, where you would add the title, you would use the boolean. So the story for this very, very simple component would look like this. It would add some props. So here I'm using add-on knobs because Nx still uses add-on knobs, but we'll talk about this later. So it will just look like this. You add the props there for Storybook, and then you return your component with the props. So this will look, so you create this. Step 3, you run it with npm run Storybook or yarn Storybook in case you use yarn. And this will open up a local server that will serve Storybook, and it will look like this. Let's see this live. So I already have this on my local setup, the one I showed you. So if I go here and do nx run test Storybook, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm sure you cannot see this, but that's nothing. I'm just running Nx run test, Storybook. What it will do is it will run. I'm using an X here, but it's you will see it's the same thing. It will open up the local server, which wait, yes, sorry, wrong part. Let me make this bigger so that you can see. Oops. Okay, so I'm looking to the right because it's my second screen and I can see what you are seeing. So, okay, so as you see, the code here, it's welcome to my sample and it's taking in all these props. So here I can actually, here is the Storybook environment. So you get a Storybook and you get all the components that may be available in the application. We are working on the, yeah, this is very small, but I swear that here it says my sample and it's my sample component. And the most cool thing is that you can actually change the props that we passed. So if you take a look here, we passed the exit we passed as false, the title we passed an empty title, and the number we passed 0. But we can go here and we can change the number to add another number, and we can change this to say new title, and we can change the Boolean to be true. And so you can see how you can start to just, you have this component completely in isolation, removed from the rest of the app, and you can actually change manually all the props right there on the fly on this live server, which is very, very cool, because if I wanted to test my component in the old case without using Storybook, I would have to fire up the application, go to the specific place where the component is, and then sort of change the props in my code, and then refresh, and then do all these things. But you don't have to do this. Storybook really helps you, saves you from all this trouble. Step 4 is that you can build Storybook as a static web application and you can deploy it. So you can sort of publish your component library or whatever you have for the rest of your team to use. Or for example, this link I had here, the examples. This is Storybook's. No, sorry. This is Storybook's actual sort of design system, where you can have, where it has like, okay, yes, this is big. So as you can see, the Storybook example of the actual Storybook site, you can see all these components added here and all these different stories. So you can have sort of like a catalog of everything that is available and just browse through it. So you can see the button here and all these things. So this could be your application. So let's go back to the presentation and let me find the place where I stopped. So this would help you if you wanted to build, and the command would be the same: npm run build Storybook, and you could give it the path to build, and it would be a static web application where you could deploy anywhere. So let's briefly see what Nx is. So the long version is that Nx is a suite of powerful, extensible dev tools to help you architect, test, and build at any scale, integrating seamlessly with modern technologies and libraries while providing a robust CLI, caching dependency management, and more. What does this mean? Nx takes care of code generation. It helps you with task execution. It helps you with task coordination. So if you want to build something, it takes care to build it in the right order according to dependencies, or it builds things in parallel. You have the dependency graph. It enforces best practices, and also it comes with zero setup and a lot of plugins. So the first thing that Nx offers is the Nx CLI. The Nx CLI is something that helps you fire up an Nx workspace, and an Nx workspace will be a monorepo where you can generate applications and libraries in any framework you like. and they will all bind together, and it will make sure that everything that is part of the Nx CLI will have access to all the tools that I just mentioned. Tooling, or that I am going to mention. It has some of the Nx tools is a dependency graph. It takes care to analyze your workspace and understand the affected paths. It helps you migrate from different versions. It helps you format. You can get a report of all the versions you're using. You can rearrange. You can do folder rearrangement. You can run many things in parallel. You can have a graphical user interface with Nx Console for VS Code, which we're going to see in a bit. And you have a lot of plugins. Also, it integrates plugins. So it also has integration with modern tools. So it integrates with Jest, with Cypress, with Prettier, with ESLint, and of course with Storybook, which we're going to see in detail. You get access to generators. So generators are sort of schematics. So there's a generator for everything you want to generate, and you can create your custom generators as well. It helps you with workflow management. You add all the tools you need, and you use them from within Nx, like we will see from Storybook. That, for example, you can run and build Storybook from within Nx and take advantage of all that Nx offers, like and you can organize your tests, your builds, and your CI. And you also have Nx Cloud. So Nx also, apart from the dependency graph and everything else I mentioned, Nx also offers the Nx cache. So you can expand Nx local computation memoization, that is the local cache, to the cloud. So this is quite amazing. So if your team has already built or tested similar code, Nx will use their results to speed up the command instead of rebuilding or retesting everything from scratch, which means that you have a cache that is in the cloud and you have certain hashes from the tasks that you do, and Nx takes care to reuse existing builds or existing artifacts instead of redoing all the tasks from scratch. So this makes everything pretty fast. So this was a very quick overview of Nx. I'll have links in the end and you will see more if you want. So how does Nx help with Storybook development? So imagine everything we talked about, how Storybook helps you develop components in isolation, and how Nx helps make everything smooth and fast and without a worry, and bring it together. So what Nx will do is Nx will create stories for you. So it will analyze your components, it will take your props and inputs, and it will create stories for you. What it will also do is it will manage Storybook through the Nx ecosystem. So if you've built Storybook before, it will use a cached version. And I guess you can use the Nx commands to run Storybook. And also, yeah, I talked about the cache, I guess. I just love the cache. It will also generate E2E tests for your stories, which is also amazing. And up until now, we're using the atoms control. And if you want to know more about this, I will send you some links. But before, so it was using the add-on knobs. Now it will be using controls where you add props from the E2E test URLs, so you can actually run actual scenarios for your stories in your E2E tests, which is pretty amazing. Also, it provides an integrated environment for all your commands, the Nx environment. It has seamless instant integration with your CI because it's already a part of Nx. Also, if you use again, I'll talk about the cache. If you use Nx build to build your Storybook, you take advantage of cache, of the affected, and the depth graph analysis and everything. And it works for both applications and libraries within Nx. It works for Angular and React. And we have active maintenance and support. So there's people of us at Nrwl actively working on maintaining this the Nrwl Storybook library, and we're always working closely with the Storybook core team to make sure we're up to date with their versions, or report bugs, or work in parallel on issues and bugs reported in GitHub. So you're in good hands, I promise. So how do you use Storybook with Nx? You first have to add the Nrwl Storybook package. So if you have an Nx workspace, you just do yarn adds Nrwl Storybook. And then if you have a project, say an application or a library named my project name, you would just do nxg, which is short for nx generate, Nrwl React, in our case, Storybook configuration. And what this command will do is it will sort of do similar things that sbinit would do, but more. So it will install the required dependencies, it will set up the necessary scripts to run and build Storybook, it will add the default Storybook configuration, it will generate stories from your components, which is amazing, and it will add scripts to your workspace JSON to serve and build Storybook. I know I have a little time, but yeah, I'll just try to rush through it. So this is your components, like we saw before, and the component we saw before was actually, the story was actually generated by Nx. So if you have this component, Nx will read the props and it will just generate the story for you, which is great. It saves you a lot of time. And if you have like a huge system, a huge design system, or a huge application with lots of different components, and you just need like the bare minimum of like generated stories, and the stories you want them to do the bare minimum, you can just use this generator and you will have something minimum to go with, which is amazing. Also, say you add a new component in an application, you can just use the storage generator, and it will only generate stories for those components in the project that don't have stories, but it will also update stories for components that have changed. So it's not that you run the generator once and the stories are not changed. You can, as you update the components, you can just rerun the generator and it will generate a new story for you that is more up to date. Then you can build Storybook with this command, your project name, and build Storybook. And this will build your Storybook. It will take advantage of cache and dependency graph. This is another nice thing. Some people were using Storybook with Nx before, and say they had Storybook in version 5. We have created a migrator called Storybook Migrate Defaults 5 to 6, which will take care to migrate your Storybook configurations to the next version. So yeah, Nx also takes care of migrations. So I'm not sure I have time for a demo, but I will briefly show you just one thing. So I showed you before. So this is an Nx workspace, an Nx React workspace, which has a React application. And in here, I have some components. With Nx console, I can go and I can generate, let's generate a new component. And I will Katerina's component, and I will generate a new component in the test application. So when I run this, this is the, let me make this bigger. Okay, so this tool here, the Nx console that runs Nx and VS Code, generated for me Katerina's component, which is just a plain React component. And let me add the prop here. Name, string, and props name. So I generated a new component with one prop. And if I go here again in the Nx console and I say generate React stories to use a story schematic and choose the test project, it will go and it will generate a story for my new component. And if I go to my new component and I add another prop, say it's a number, no, almost done. And I go to the schematic again. From here, generate stories, and I say for test and generate the stories. It will go and it will update my story eventually. Yeah. Oh, because I had it open potentially. Yeah. Sadly, it didn't work now. The demos never work, do they? Okay, let me try it once more and then I'll wrap up. If I go to test and generate cyber stories and I click run, let's see. It should have updated my story. Oh yeah, it updated the story. Good. It added another prop here. So with this very simple user interface that is very simple to use and very simple to read, you can just create stories from scratch just by clicking a few buttons, and you can have everything ready. I will not demo anymore. So a wrap up, Storybook helps you create a catalog for your components, like I'm just saying some overview things now. The Storybook helps you quickly test out various states and scenarios in isolation. Nx helps you use Storybook by integrating it with its tool system. And Nx helps you use Storybook by generating stories for you. Future steps for Nx is coming soon. We will integrate with controls and we will move away from add-on knobs. Potentially, we will produce some migration or customization schematics or generators. And it's an ongoing process. We're addressing bugs and keeping them up to date with new Storybook versions. Some links here, you will see them. So this is the link to my slides. So you can copy this link here. It's the only link you need to remember. And if you remember this link and you go to my slides, you will get access to all the other links that I'm showing here. So that was it. Thank you very much. And sorry, I rushed it a bit in the end.
Thank you very much, Katerina. Actually, I was quite familiar with the Storybook before, but the combination with Nx looks just super. And I can't wait to try it out.
Cool.
We have a few questions, so let's do it. So how do you decide when to not use Storybook in terms of the level of components you should create storybooks to? For example, some devs create an entire page, and some people just use components with Storybook. So what is your rule of thumb, I guess?
So my rule of thumb would be, if it's a big application and it has a lot of components that may be reused here and there, and they have lots of different states, I would use Storybook. Let me think how I could answer this better. I would not use Storybook if it's like a small project I'm doing on my own and nobody else is going to see, or if we're a very small team and I'm just working on something, or if a component is not having lots of different states, or if it's not that hard to test all the different states that there are there. But if you decide to go with Storybook, I would try and create stories for as low-level components as you can, like fine-grain it, like create a component for this button, or have a toolbar and create a component for the create a story for the toolbar, but also create a component for the little buttons of the toolbar, for example.
Yeah, so go all down until the low components like buttons and fields and whatnot.
Yes, okay. But I would say it's not the way you should go. Of course, every case is different.
Of course. So last question is, will Nx support Vue?
I don't know.
Okay, fair enough. So unfortunately, we don't have enough time to cover all the questions. So if you just check out YouTube, check out on YouTube or follow up with Katerina or on Twitter, it would be great. So thank you very much, Katerina. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very, very much.
Bye-bye. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Bye.
So that's it, folks. Another event is about to end, and I would like to thank you all for joining. I would like to thank our speakers for coming up and dedicating the time to talk about these awesome topics. The lineup for the next event for April is already closed, and probably we will open the registration in a few days from now, so stay tuned. Make sure to subscribe to our meetup group and the YouTube channel so you won't miss any notification, and you will be able to join on April. As usual, this event will be recorded as long as the other sessions, so check our YouTube channel, and you will be able to see the monthly dev 1, 2, and soon 3, in case you didn't show up at the beginning. So again, thank you very much, and see you next time. Bye-bye.